So hopefully, is my screen sharing currently? Can you see my mouse on this screen? Awesome. We're ready to go. Well, this is a fantastic turnout. I'm really excited to see you all here. There's a lot to cover in terms of what's new in Maya. Stephen kind of gave you a preview of all that. I'm going to start out with Maya USD. So Maya USD is brand new for Maya 2022. It's actually an open source plugin that we've been developing for the last few years in partnership with a lot of studios. So we'll go into the functionality of what you're getting with that plugin and what's available to you now. Real quick, y'all heard a few people mention my name, my title. I'm a product owner. I'm the product owner for both USD and rigging. I come from a background of visual effects for the most part. Spent a lot of time at Rhythm and Hue Studios. I spent a little time in gaming with Blizzard Entertainment, and so that's the production experience I bring to this. And this tool is the type of tool that definitely could make all those production experiences run a lot smoother. So I'm gonna give a bit of an overview. The first section that I'm gonna talk about is just a single slide. It's just a little background on what USD itself is, in case you're not familiar with USD. If you would like more detailed information on what USD itself is, there are prior presentations we've given where we've gone into a lot of detail about USD itself. But today we're really gonna focus on its integration within Maya. But I will briefly talk about what USD is. So USD is an open source technology that Pixar released in 2016. And it's, at the risk of reading a slide here, it's an extensible common language, and it's a composition engine for 3D data. And there's a lot of problems in visual effects and gaming and animation where you have large data sets that you're having to manage, you're having to collaborate on these things. You're wanting to edit this data and move it around. And this USD technology really helps solve all those problems together. At its most basic, a lot of people look at USD and think that it's just a geometry caching format. They might think that it's just a drop-in replacement for Alembic, or it's a replacement for FBX. And in a lot of ways, it can replace those, but there's a lot more going on there that it's capable of beyond what those other technologies can do. So yes, it can represent geometry caches, but that's just the tip of the iceberg for USD. One of the more powerful features of it is the fact that it has a system of non-destructive sparse overrides, which it implements through something it calls composition arcs. This is a compositor for 3D data. So you can have a bunch of different ways of authoring opinions about data, and those opinions are all resolved down to compose a final scene graph for you. So of the types of composition arcs, we have file references, and we have payloads, we have variants, we also have just basic layers, sublayers. And at the end, all of that is composed together and produces an extremely lightweight, highly optimized scene graph. Sorry, I'll pop open my chat here, make sure I'm not missing any messages that might come my way. Okay, so that's just a really brief idea of what USD itself is. Again, Pixar has amazing documentation on USD itself. So if you just Google Pixar USD, they maintain a site that has really thorough documentation, technical documentation, user documentation. It has great glossaries that really gives you an understanding of what USD provides. And now we'll go into the Maya implementation of that. So USD and Maya. The first thing that we wanted to be able to do is bring USD data into Maya. Now, we're bringing this in a different way than we've brought data in the past. It's not the same way you might bring in, say, an OBJ or something like that. USD data is brought in and maintained in memory as USD data. It remains USD data. And so we wanted to be able to see that data in Maya. The first step would be, if you have USD data in your pipeline, you need to be able to visualize this data in Maya when you're using it. And there's three main places you want to be able to visualize that data. You want to be able to visualize it in the outliner, where you want to see the scene hierarchy and representation of it. You want to be able to visualize it in the viewport, and you want to be able to visualize it in the attribute editor. So I'll start with the outliner a bit and just talk some about what you're seeing here. So this is just a close-up of our current outliner. And what you see here is you see two different data models. You have the native Maya data model, but you also have the USD data model that's sitting right alongside of it. And what we want to do in the outliner is give you an indication of whether you were looking at the USD data model or the Maya data model. And you can see that up here, these are Maya cameras. So these cameras are represented by Maya transforms. And what you'll see down the side here is you see the familiar expansion boxes with the little plus in them. They're gray. And then you get down to a Maya transform, and then you get down to the proxy shape. The proxy shape is a custom shape node that holds all of the USD data that you want to see. So the proxy shape is a Maya node, but everything under it does not exist as a Maya node. These are simply these are simply pieces of USD data. These are USD prims, what you see here. And so the way we've shown you when you're looking at Maya data and USD data is we have these square boxes and this gray color when you're dealing with Maya data. And when you're dealing with non-Maya data, what you're going to see is these diamonds, and you see a different color representing the data branches that are the non-Maya data models. And if you don't like these colors, both of these colors are now adjustable through Maya's color options, so you can adjust that. Now, we talked a bit about USD having non-destructive edits in it. And so we've done our best to show that in this editor as well. So if you have visibility, an item will be grayed out, just like a Maya item is. So you can see here this item called North Group is grayed out because it's invisible. But you'll see right below it, you'll see something that's grayed out with a strike through it. Well, that's showing that this prim happens to be deactivated. And what a deactivation is in USD, it's a non-destructive deletion. So you can delete this item, but it's still there. It just acts as if it's deleted. So that's why we call it non-destructive, because it can always be brought back. Now, if you have a USD scene that has a tremendous amount of deleted items in it, deactivated items in it, and you don't want to see them littering your outliner, you can come up into the display menu and you can pop that open and you can filter out inactive prims. So it won't show you all those deactivated ones, but you can always toggle that back on so you can get to those prims and reactivate them so you can see them. Along with that, you see the data type. So icons are showing you the data type. So this arch group, this is a USD prim that is of type transform. So it uses the same icon as Maya's transform icon. So you can see data model, you can see data type, and then we also talked about those composition arcs that USD has. And some composition arcs live on individual prims. Some apply to the whole stage, which is USD in its representation in memory, its container in memory. But a lot of composition arcs just apply to individual prims. And so when there's a composition arc on a prim, like say a reference or a payload or a variant, you'll see this badge here. So here we see this little arc badge, and this lets us know that kitchen table has a composition arc in it. In this case, it's a reference. So kitchen table has been referenced onto this prim. Down below it, you'll see that chair B1 has a composition arc, but it shows the V because it's a variant. And later I'll show you that you can right click on that variant and choose which variant that you're displaying when you're editing this data. So this is visualizing the data in USD. So I'll show you one of the most important things is showing this data in the viewport. So what you're seeing here, this is entirely USD data in the viewport. And you'll see that USD data is supported through our draw styles in VP2. So we can draw them as bounding box. We can smooth shade these things. I just walked through a few of these so that you can get an idea of the draw styles that are supported on USD. And keep in mind, this is not my data we're looking at, which is fantastic because it's very efficient, fast data. Here you can see that screen space ambient occlusion is supported. I think I'll go here and I turn back on wireframe over shaded, so you can see that it's aliased a bit. And if we go turn on the hardware anti-aliasing, that cleans it up. So anti-aliasing is supported. All these different draw styles are supported. You'll see that lights are supported. Now this is a Maya light on a USD object, and you can see that shadows are cast. And you can cast shadows from USD objects to Maya objects from Maya. They can live in the viewport together. Here you'll see that we marquee select a Maya light and the mesh, and we decide we don't want the meshes. So we turn off the pick masks, and turning off the mesh pick mask is respected by the USD selection. We can select USD data right in the viewport. We can frame it, and we can work with it just like it's Maya data. So that's our goal here, is to make sure that your interaction with this data is seamless as if it were Maya data. And just at the end here, I turn on the Maya representation of this. So you can see what the Maya version, which is on the left, and the USD version on the right look like together in the viewport. So very powerful, very fast. and like I said, fast. That's one of the focuses. So with USD, Pixar shipped a tool called USD View, which is a great viewer of USD data. And it's very fast. It shows off how fast USD is and how performant it is. So we've been using that as a benchmark as we've enabled USD support through VP2. So I wanted to show you that here. This is a point instance example where I'm going to create this point instance example. It's 6,000 objects from the Pixar kitchen scene. You see how quickly they load. When I switch to render, it's instantaneous. So we'll swap this out for a higher resolution geometry. We'll go for 138,000 of these things. You'll notice the proxy version loads instantly. When I switch it to the render version, I think we have about a 2-second load time to load 138,000 of these objects as point instances. And then you can see the tumble performance and playback speed when we're dealing with such heavy geometry. So extremely, extremely fast. Now, this is a bit of a contrived example. So I will show you a more production-friendly example. This is some geometry, and this geometry came from Gaia, and the trees here come from SpeedTree. But these are about 50,000 poly trees, and there's several 100,000 trees on this. And watch how fast this loads when you load this set. So pretty fast to get in and working with production level assets. And that's one of the primary goals of USD, is to make sure you have this fast interaction and not take the overhead of the Maya data model when you don't need to bear the overhead of the Maya data model. Okay, so we talked a bit about this USD data model that's new to Maya, and you're already familiar with Maya and all the workflows it has. Maya is used in all stages of production pipelines, and it's been around for 20 years. So there are 20 years of workflows built up across all different stages of the pipeline. So a lot of functionality. And then we have this new data model that introduces even newer concepts, and we want it to work together seamlessly. So the surface area of the intersection of those two is huge. So we needed to take a slice of that and tackle a slice that we felt would deliver a lot of value to you and get you going. And I think what we settled on is that assembly and layout really was the workflows that we wanted to target first up, because we felt those could really leverage the power of USD the best right now. So as we define USD, as we define assembly and layout, we kind of break it up into these simple functions. I think this is an oversimplification of assembly and layout, but it's a great way to kind of wrap your head around what our goals were here. So the first section of assembly and layout would be the ability to create a model, right? You want to be able to work like you always have in Maya. You want to generate models from your modeling department, and you want to write those out, but you want to create a library of USD assets. So you want to be able to take a Maya model, and you want to be able to convert it to USD data on disk that can be consumed by your pipeline. So that's the creating a model phase, and we'll go into that. The next would be to create a set. So once you've got a disk full of these USD assets, you need to be able to bring them into a set. You need to be able to assemble them and aggregate these things into larger pieces using USD. And that's really how we've kind of defined the creating a set aspect of it. And then finally, you need to be able to edit a set. And editing a set means that you want to be able to create a layer shot structure that your pipeline might use, but you also want to be able to author those non-destructive edits on that USD data that we talked about. So I'll go ahead and drill into that. So the first one is creating a model. And like we talked about, creating a model is about data translation. So I mentioned earlier when we had VP2 that we would bring USD data into memory as USD and keep it as USD data. But there's actually two ways to get USD data into Maya. One way is through data translation. What that means is you have USD data on disk, and you go and you import it, just like you're importing an OBJ. But once you've imported it, it exists only as Maya data. It's thrown away any knowledge of the USD data, and it exists as Maya data. And the same thing round tripping that. If you're in Maya, you've created something in Maya with traditional Maya tools, Maya meshes, and you want to generate USD, you need to translate that through an export process to USD. So this is the second way to get USD data into Maya. It doesn't leverage as much of USD's power as bringing the stage in and keeping it in memory does, but it is useful for your pipeline because all your modeling tools are on Maya data. So I'll show you what that import process looks like. It looks just like importing any other, importing and exporting any other data. So here I am looking at a Maya teapot, and I'm making an edit to this teapot. I'll go ahead and go through a traditional file export, but instead of another data type, I will choose this USD export. And you'll see I have several options about what gets exported to USD with this, how I want to interpret materials that go out, and we'll export that. And then I'll pop it open in USD View, which is Pixar's preview tool, and you can see that it looks the same. So USD is a fantastic interchange format and a very fast interchange format. And you see that we have the same look in the viewport there. So now I'm going to bring that teapot I exported back in as a stage just for comparison's sake. So now you're going to see the side by side, the Maya data on one side and the USD data on the other. So these are the two data models sitting next to each other in the viewport together. And you can see that they're indistinguishable. So this is a fantastic way to generate and work with these models. Let me pop on to the next one. Okay, so the inverse of that is being able to import a model, right? If you have USD data on disk, but you need to make some mesh edits to it, or you need to work on the model, you do have the ability to re-import that back into Maya. So here you'll see I just go through a file import. I'll select the asset on disk that we've already modified. And when I go to import this, I'm going to pause this when I get here. So one of the things that this does is it brings up what we call hierarchy view. And this is a fantastic tool for import because it lets you set the state of your USD scene before you import it. USD data is meant to hold very, very, very large data sets. So you could have a very large data set here. And if you convert that entire data set to Maya data, there might be some overhead you incur that you don't want to incur. So yes, if you only want to work on a piece of a set, you could import the whole thing and translate the whole thing, and then in Maya, prune it back down. But this interface lets you go ahead and get a preview of the data before you bring it in and kind of set the state and say, I want to bring this object in or not that object, or I want to set this object to a particular variant. And then it'll import just that state of USD. And that'll make sure that you don't end up translating data or taking the hit for translating data that you really didn't want to work with in the first place. And if you want to bring the whole USD data in, you don't have to go into hierarchy view. You can just reset it back to the whole data set and it'll bring in the whole data set. We have a teapot here. We want to bring the whole thing in. So we'll go ahead and bring that in. And then here I just bring it back in as a stage so you can see again the Maya data next to the USD data. And you can see that that is another lossless round trip there. So very powerful. And so using that process, we now have been able to create a library of assets on disk. We have a folder that's just full of USD assets that represent this kitchen we want to build. So now we want to build this kitchen. And what we can do with USD is USD has a layer structure to it. And there's two types of layers. One is a file backed layer, which means there's a file on disk. The other one is called an anonymous layer, which means it only exists in memory. And so we've enabled workflows to let you work with anonymous layers so that you don't have to go create a bunch of files on disk until you're ready to. So that's the process we're going to use here is we'll start with an anonymous layer. So I'll go into the My Create menu. I will create a stage from the new layer. And then I'm going to add a transform to it. And I'll rename it. And you notice that I'm working with USD data natively. There's no Maya data here. And I'm able to rename these things in the outliner. I'm able to duplicate these things. I'm able to group them. And then here I'm creating a def, and then I'll right click on it and I'll add a composition art to it called a reference. And now I'm going to bring in walls. I'll do this 2 more times to bring in a floor and counters. But you can see that we've introduced the new concepts of USD, like USD references and things like that in anonymous layers. But we have also supported traditional Maya workflows in terms of the outliner support with hotkeys and renaming and duplicating and things along those lines. So it lets you keep you don't have to learn a new workflow when you're working with USD data. Let's get past this. Okay, so now we've created the set, but like I said, it exists only in memory. This doesn't exist on disk yet. So we want to get this out to disk. So we can pop open this layer editor, which lets you see the sublayer stack of USD. You can get that from the outliner, or you can go into the Windows general menu and launch it. It's proxy shape specific, so each shape represents a different stage, so you can switch between different stages if you have multiple stages. You can double click the root layer, the anonymous layer, and you give it a file name. And now it's going to write it out as the name I gave it, which is kitchen.usda. Now this is saved out as USD data. So that was pretty simple. We assembled this thing, and now we've got a set that lives on disk. So next is being able to edit these sets. And if you remember earlier, I said there's going to be two main pieces to edit a set. One is to build up the basic shot structure you want. So this is a very quick example. So watch, don't blink here. I add 6 sublayers. I structure the 6 sublayers, and then I hit save the stage, and I bulk save it. I give each layer its own file name. And when I'm done, I'll have a shot structure that's broken out by sequence level work and shot level work between animation and effects and dressing and layout. And so I was able to create that structure rather quickly. That structure is a bit of an arbitrary structure. You can use whatever's best practices in your own pipeline. That structure was actually based on that Pixar documentation I told you about. If you go to the Pixar USD documentation and you go into their glossary and you look at the sublayer example, they lay out that particular shot structure with those names. So I just showed you how you could create that example from the Pixar documentation very quickly right through the UI. Okay, so now that we've got our shot structure we want to work with, now we want to bring the kitchen we've created back into that shot. So here's where we're going to get into a lot of the non-destructive overrides. So what we want to do is in that sublayer stack we created, we're going to go to that weakest layer, and we're going to target that layer to say anything we edit is going to be written to this layer. So here you'll see I target the weakest layer in the layer editor by just clicking this circle. And now everything's going to be written to the sequence dressing. So I'll add a new prim here. I'll add the reference. I'll rename it to kitchen set, and I'll reference in the kitchen set we created earlier. And now this shot structure is going to bring the kitchen set in on this weak layer. And so that's what's going to enable non-destructive editing. So what we can do next, after we get through this one, I'm just going to go ahead and save it to disk to make sure the stage is saved so these changes persist. The next thing we want to do is now we want to actually get in and edit this stuff. You know, we've talked about how we wanted all this to feel very natural and native within Maya, but we haven't shown any editing of USD data. We've just shown converting and viewing. Now what we'll do is we'll have the user target the next strongest layer, the layer right above the one that we brought the kitchen set in on. And now all of our edits will be written to that layer. And I'll show you some of the edits we can do. So here we go. We'll target the sequence layout layer. So now all of our edits will go there. So we're going to move the teapot around on the counter. It's not where the director wants it. So we need to move it around. We're able to do that, and it's authoring that edit. Just the translation is the only thing that's being written to the sequence layout layer, which is one of the benefits of USD. We're able to use point snapping. We can point snap to and from USD data in the viewport. Let's see, I'll show you a few other things here. I show you that the attribute editor isn't just there for looks. It's also writable, so you can edit the attributes right there, and those values are being authored to that layer that we have selected. Sorry, my edits lifted it off the counter, so I had to snap it back down to the counter because nobody wants a floating teapot. So then there's the idea of being able to select by kind. So there's a metadata that lives on each USD prim that's called kind. So you can specify the intent of a certain object. So when we select in the viewport, it's going to give us the lowest level prim that we've selected, but we can set that kind to model or assembly. And what it'll do is whatever we select, it'll traverse up from there and select the entire assembly or select the model that prim's a member of. We also have the ability to save individual layers. So you can see in the layer editor, we can right click and save individual layers. We have the ability to here, I think, is this a clear or remove, I believe. I'm reverting to the file. So this will revert to the state of the USD as it is on disk. We can also come down and we can clear all opinions from this layer, which will return the teapot over to the stove. Along with that, I believe muting is next. So it'll show you how you can mute a layer, which is, oh wait, no, sorry. We're gonna add a parent layer first so you can see the convenience function to create a new layer above you and parent yourself into it. And then I believe now we cover muting, here we go. So if I turn this mute button, what it does is it turns off the effect of the layer, but it keeps the edits around. And I can turn that back on and the edits get reapplied. So this is a big part of that non-destructive editing. One of the edits we could have made here is a delete. We could have deleted an object non-destructively and toggled this on and off. Through the script editor, you can debug these things. You can print the contents of a layer to the script editor, and you can see the only thing that exists on that layer is just the fact that we've moved the teapot to a new position. So it's extremely efficient and a great way to work. You just have to structure best practices around these tools. And that really encompasses all the assembly and layout workflows. One more thing I wanted to touch on with USD is constraints. So there are a lot of studios that we've been working with on this, and a tremendous number of them wanted to be able to depend USD data and Maya data on each other. And so what we did is, there in the current release, there aren't any workflows built around this, but through scripting, you can access and build these dependencies. And so we put that in there so that pipelines can put tooling around it and start using these dependencies where they need it. So I'll show a video of what that looks like. This is a Maya light in the scene. And this is a USD rescue boat here. And as I move the USD boat, you see the Maya light moves with it. And I can show you what that looks like in the node editor. There's just a DG level connection that pulls the matrix of the boat out of the proxy shape and drives it into the offset parent matrix for the spotlight. If you're not familiar, offset parent matrix is a new attribute that the rigging team introduced into Maya 2020 last year. That introduces just an arbitrary matrix into the transform stack. And you can use it for things like this. We were able to leverage it for USD to take this matrix out and drive the position of the spotlight while still being able to grab the spotlight and edit it, because that connection is not occupying the transformation channels. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is really the fact that this has been a collaboration, right? This is an open source project. The history of USD and Maya has been a bit fragmented. In 2016, when Pixar released USD, they also released some integrations to third-party packages, and one of those was to Maya. Now, the way Pixar works in their pipeline is Maya is in heavy use at the beginning of their pipeline, but they have proprietary software that they use in the middle stages of their pipeline for animation phases and things like that. So Pixar's plugin into Maya had a big emphasis on data translation, those import-export workflows we talked about towards the beginning of the assembly and layout section. And so that was fantastic. But when they open sourced that, other studios saw this and saw the value of it and started trying to adopt it in their pipelines. And one of the most well-known examples of that is Animal Logic, who went and built a tremendous amount of functionality around this plugin. And they forked the Pixar plugin, and eventually that fork got pretty far away from where the Pixar plugin is. And the emphasis of that plugin was around shot-based animation, because Animal Logic uses Maya throughout its entire production pipeline. And so they needed much better shot workflows that the Pixar plugin wasn't as well suited for, because Pixar didn't use those. So that's where their emphasis was. And they very kindly open sourced their project as well. And where that ended up was there were two very good plugins that did two very distinct jobs out there, and it was confusing a lot of users. And so we all came together. We did that along with Luma Pictures, who also had Maya to Hydra, which integrates the Hydra rendered delegates into the viewport and implements a Maya scene delegate to Hydra, and with Blue Sky Pictures. And we brought all that together under one repository and brought this to this one plugin that you're seeing here that has shipped with Maya 2022. Now, the great thing about this is open source. It's decoupled from Maya. It's a plugin. So, within the next few weeks, there's going to be an updated installer for the Maya USD plugin that's going to bring even more features. So we have the ability to keep dropping features, and you as users have the ability to engage with us and talk with us. I've put the website here, github.com/autodesk/Maya-USD. If you're not technical and you don't deal with code, don't let this scare you, the fact it's hosted on GitHub. There's a discussion board there where you can come and ask questions, and it doesn't matter whether you're a programmer or not. And the packages that we're going to be putting up here are going to be pre-compiled installers. It's just going to be where you're going to be able to go and download an updated version of Maya USD and be able to install that and run against Maya 2022. I will say, as a plugin, it also installs against Maya 2020. It installs against 2019. But a lot of the functionality I showed you depends on, I'm going to get a little bit technical here, but a lot of the functionality I showed you depends on new API that we call UFE, which stands for Universal Frontend, which is an abstraction layer between Maya's interface and the underlying data model. And so Maya 2019 and 2020 use UFE 1.0. whereas 2022 just shipped with UFE 2.0. There's a fall off in support of certain features as you move back into UFE 1.0. For example, the attribute editor is only in UFE 2.0. The right-click menu on the outliner, that's only in UFE 2.0. So if you use our plugin in versions before Maya 2022, it works, but expect some scaled back support for certain features. One nice thing is the entire import-export workflow does not depend on UFE at all. So that one works in every version of Maya that you can install it against. So that's really USD in a nutshell.